Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Most people intuitively understand it's sensible to spread risk. For instance, not accumulating all of your life savings in one bank account or single company share. The principle of diversification has been embedded into financial economics now for over 60 years. By combining two lowly correlated asset classes together in a portfolio, we can reduce the overall risk of the portfolio without necessarily reducing the return. This is why diversification is often called your only free lunch in investing. Traditionally, with investment portfolios, this means building a broadly diversified portfolio made up of different asset classes. You take some high-risk assets, such as equities, and you combine them with some low-risk assets, such as government bonds. Exposure to the asset classes should then be diversified across the different company stocks, across different government bonds, economies, geographies, and so on. However, even though you can diversify away some risk, you can't eliminate it entirely. An easy example of this is the stock market. You can diversify the risk of the market by investing across a number of company stocks, but you can't remove the risk of the market as a whole. This is what we call systematic risk. This problem is highlighted if we think about a traditional 60% equity and 40% bond portfolio. Instead of thinking about the risk of the portfolio in terms of the percentage allocation to equities, we need to think about the portfolio in terms of how much risk is involved. Equities are much more riskier than bonds. The best risk measure we can use for this is called volatility. A well-diversified equity portfolio typically has volatility of about 20%. And if we assume the bond component of our portfolio is made up of global short-dated government bonds, the volatility is typically around 5%. So the bonds have total risk points of 200, that's the 40% times the 5%, and the equities have total risk points of 1200, that's 60% times the 20%. The total number of risk points for the portfolio is therefore 1400, of which equities are 1200 points. That's 86% of the portfolio. So even a traditionally well-diversified portfolio still isn't that well diversified and is still dominated by stock market risk. So how can we improve on that? Well, the answer is to look at the other unique sources of risk and return in markets and which have been identified by financial economists over the last 30 years or so. These sources of systematic risk, or what we call risk factors, equally can't be diversified away. So this leads us to the next level of portfolio construction, where portfolios are diversified not just in the traditional sense, but by building exposure to the risk factors. The first multi-risk factor model was developed in the early 90s and was called a three-factor model. It built on the stock market risk, which was the first identified risk factor in the early 1960s, by adding on the size and value risk factors. That's investing in small companies and value companies which have delivered additional return premiums to the broader stock market. Other factors have since been added, such as momentum, quality and profitability.